All right, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to another episode of Digital Voices. My name is Bo Tiffany. We talk about what's on our hearts, what's on our minds, share stories that are personal to us, and gives an insight to who we are as individuals. Today I have a special guest, Mr. Steve Burrows, film director, Hollywood sensation. He also has been a champion for medical errors as a result of what his mom went through. So we have lots to talk about today. I am super happy to have him on my podcast, and I want to wish him a warm welcome. Thanks for joining us today, Steve.
Really great to be here. Thanks for having me. Yeah, love it. Thank you.
My pleasure. So you and I connected as I went through my own journey for medical errors and the things that happened to me post-accident. I really connected with what happened to your mom and the journey that you've been on, which also just, it came across my path in the right time. I was going through a ton of things, and I had a different perception of what our healthcare system was than the reality of it. And so just going down that rabbit hole and seeing the things that you experienced and talked about on your documentary, Bleed Out, it really resonated within me, because at first I thought, well, am I crazy? Is this really happening? So that's how I initially found out who you were. That's not to say that I didn't know you from some of your other work. In fact, I was pleasantly surprised to find out that you were on Spy Hard, one of my favorite movies with Leslie Nielsen, along with a ton of other stuff too. So I want to kind of break down who you are a little bit for our listeners and kind of figure out who Steve is. So originally you're from Wisconsin, is that correct?
I am. I grew up in Milwaukee, Greendale, right outside of Milwaukee, South Side.
Awesome.
And just had a normal kind of, normal upbringing. I was kind of the class clown growing up. When I got to college, I started to take it a little more seriously. A friend of mine said he thought might be able to do this for a living, and I said, "Are you sure?" I mean, I had no skills. I still to this day had no real marketable skills. I never had a real 9-to-5 job. I went right from college. I went to the University of Wisconsin and moved to Chicago right out of college, and took an improv class, and that was it. I never went back. I mean,
so you found the niche for your class clown. That's awesome. And you actually have been in quite a bit of stuff. What got you into acting? Was there a door that opened that you just decided to start to explore, or was it something that you had always dreamed of doing?
Well, I always thought if I could, the thing that always was the most fulfilling to me as I was growing up was making people laugh and trying to do it in an organic way where it wasn't forced or trying too hard. I started to try to figure out what was funny. What did I think was funny? What did I think people would think that was funny? And there was one common thread that I really didn't even realize until I moved to Chicago. I actually, the class that I took was with a guy named Del Close. And Del Close is one of the great comedic directors and gurus of all time. He's responsible for discovering John Belushi and Bill Murray and Chris Farley. I mean, Harold Ramis. Del he was a Second City director for years. He was the early acting coach in the early Saturday Night Live years. And when I moved to Chicago, he had this little theater called the Improv Olympic. And he was teaching this philosophy that was called basically truth in comedy. And it was improv, but it was we're not going to make stuff up. We're not going to tell jokes. We're going to base all of our stories and our scenes and our humor, and we're going to try to base it on the truth, because he always felt that the truth was always funnier than fiction, and he was right. And I didn't even realize that I was kind of practicing this as a little kid growing up through school and high school and college. I just didn't. He was the one who really articulated it the cleanest, and then also gave me the skills to actually do it, which was, by the way, to go on stage I auditioned for him, and a woman who was running the group, Improv Olympic at the time, she still is. Her name's Sharna Halpern. And Del and Sharna gave me my break when I was just I was 20. And I took a class, and within a week I was actually on stage with these other great performers who were older than I was. And I just got lucky. I was put in this group that was just happened to be this great ensemble. And I learned on stage. And that's how I became a performer, just literally out of necessity.
Wow. And I would think they saw something special in you. I think what you have done and what you've brought to us as a people through your work resonates. A talent and just a genuine personality that comes out in your work. Also, just in how you dealt with everything. I personally kind of have it's an acronym I live by. It's SMILE. It's simply maintain integrity and limit your excuses. Just put one foot in front of the other, and just keep applying yourself. And
yeah.
I would say that you that's what you've done. You followed your heart and your dreams, and doors just kind of opened up. But you wouldn't have been able to have those open up had you not taken those first steps, which I think a lot of us that are maybe driven to get into something, but we're having that fear of actually crossing that threshold. Don't be afraid. Just do it. You may surprise yourself and the world around you. So you go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you bring up just a real a thought that I haven't had this in a while, but I think one of the reasons I was able to maybe cut early to the chase with me was I actually lost I lost a couple people early in my life. I had a stepmother who died when she was 31 years old, and I had my very first girlfriend in high school. She died when she was 18. And those were, I was old enough in both instances. Well, I was 16 and then 17 when these things happened. And I was old enough to see how fragile life was and how precious it is, and to take nothing for granted. And when difficult things would come up in my early life, when I was after those it was junior and senior year in high school when these things happened, I paid attention, and I saw that. So when things got a little rough in my life, or the normal fears of living life and taking chances,
right.
I would think to those two women that I lost, I was close to, that I lost, and I thought, they're not here anymore. They don't get to live life. They don't get to take chances. They don't get to do things. And so what if I try something and I fail? Who cares? At least I get to try.
Right.
And there was an early fearlessness that I wish I could take credit for, but I have to give it to those two people, Mary Jo and to Kathy, where the lesson I learned in their life and in their death, it was that, as far as I know, we got one shot at this, and we might as well go for it.
Yeah, make the most of it. It's a valuable opportunity in life, and it's a shame when people don't follow their dreams and don't try to make the most out of their own personal situation or life. The more you apply yourself, the more you can achieve. It's a legacy, not only on professional stuff, but on the people around you and the impacts that you've made on the lives around you. Life. I think of people like that as angels. Not that I'm super religious, but there's certain people that come in your life that just have helped encourage you and shape you. It sounds like those are two of your angels. So shout out to them.
I like that reference, because I never really actually thought of them exactly like that. But I look back and I go, they're still with me. I think about them all the time, and I would have never been able to do any of the stuff that I've been lucky enough to do unless I saw their, the one woman was sick. Mary Jo she lost her life to bone cancer, and the other girl in high school, Kathy, she was killed in a car accident. So it was, these were deeply, and then they were so young, and I just,
Right.
of course I was incredibly saddened and horrified by it, but I also thought, boy, this is, just
Life's
things
precious. Yeah.
things can change. Yeah, things can change in a blink. I just decided at some point I was not going to be. I mean, I'm fearful and scared like everybody else, but I don't let it. I don't let it control me.
You hit that on the head. All of us feel that way. It's good to know that people like yourself too still feel that way. But it's a determination that we have to not let that control you and not let that prevent you from going down that path that you're trying to follow. So yeah,
Exactly.
I connect with that a lot. So moving into some of your adult stuff, obviously you had a career before the things that happened to your mom. You were in a ton of different movies as an actor before you got into looks like some of the art department, and then directing and editing as well. Along with, I'm on your wiki biography right now, and there's just so much.
Yeah.
You've done so many great, wonderful things. With that said, is there any highlights that pop out to you that you'd like to share?
Well, there were a couple. Well, thank you for all of that. There were a couple things along the way that were kind of the definitive moments in my career. Like when I first got married, we came out here to California and we didn't have anything, and I auditioned for the Wheel of Fortune game show, and because I needed money,
Right.
we had zero broke, and I thought I'm going to go on this show and win tons of money, and I actually went on the show. I got on the show, and I ended up being the worst contestant in the history of the show, like really bad. I was the first player by all 5 consecutive vowels and still not be able to solve the puzzle. I had won so little money that they had to lower the price of the lowest price item just so I could go shopping. This is back when they had the daytime show. I was the first player to be invited back for a second show, and I had not won a single thing. And I started telling people that I was on the Wheel of Fortune and I was the worst contestant. And a friend of mine said, "You ought to make a movie about that." And I thought, well, how am I going to do that? So I ended up I got the video from the actual game show where I was on NBC, and I made up this fictional character, and I intercut the fictional character with my real performance on the show, and my appearance and subsequent humiliation on the show. And I cut together this little short. I called it The Soldier of Fortune, and that was like me taking the next level from when I was on stage doing the comedy. Now it was like I made a film based on what really happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I embellished certain things, but in the end, it's me on the show really sucking really bad. And in a monumentally funny way as well. And I wish I could say I was doing it intentionally, but it did not happen that way. And that was the film. It took me a couple of years to, piece together a little 30-minute film like that, but I did.
Mm-hmm.
And once I got it done, I started sending out the film fest, and the thing just took off. It was one of those things where, no one could believe how badly I did on this show. And it was really funny to people, and everybody knew the show. It's the most famous game show. And that kind of started everything as a filmmaker for me, because I was forced to not only write it, but also be in it, cut it, direct it, even though it was a little project. I was wearing many hats. So I was having to, just have to do it, figure out. I didn't know really what I was doing. And I put it together. We ended up winning a whole bunch of film festivals. And that was the thing that put me, I went from being just like a guy auditioning for parts out here to, I actually had a movie now.
Right.
And that was a seminal moment, really. That kind of took me to the next level, where people started to take me seriously as a writer, director, performer type of guy.
Well, that's amazing. That's a great story. And the way that you were able to shape that experience into a movie and then look at yourself and the humor that you brought with it and package it in that way, I think that says volumes. A lot of us have a difficult time looking at our own work or looking at ourselves. So the fact that you can be yourself and then look at it in a different light from the outside as you're editing this stuff, I would think that, at least for myself, it would be difficult for me to edit my own things, because watching myself or listening to myself is difficult. I haven't gotten to that thick skin part. Plus, I think people sometimes see us differently than we see ourselves. And I think you're pretty in touch with what you're doing. I know that, that was in 1991. So it looks like you were kind of living your career, growing the career. It's when your mom ended up having some things happen. Let me set that up a little bit better. So mom went in for a routine hip replacement, and there was some medical errors that ended up complicating her surgery and recovery, which then left her with a brain injury or brain damage that then also affected her mobility and quality of life. And that for you was obviously really rough. How many kids altogether in your family?
My sister and I. My sister is a teacher over at American Embassy Schools. She's currently in Singapore and was in India and Bangkok at the time. And I was directing commercials. I'd gone from being in commercials to directing commercials. I had just made my first feature film, Chump Change, and things were going really good. And like the middle 2000s, like from 2000 to when my mom went down in 2009.
Okay.
And she went in for a routine partial hip replacement and came out in a coma with permanent brain damage. And we later found out she lost over half the blood in her body during the surgery, and the records didn't make any sense, and the handwritten anesthesia records were medically impossible. And I just stumbled into this whole thing. I had no idea what I was doing. I was just trying to keep my mother alive.
Right.
Because they told me she was most likely going to die. And so, everything in show business here, it just stopped because my mom was, it was life or death.
Well, and you had
the more I
go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say your mom and your family itself is so tight knit. So, for any one of us that come from a home like that, most of us, if not all of us, would just drop everything and run home and take care of what needed to be taken care of. That sounds kind of like what happened with you. You put everything on hold. You came home and you kind of fit a role of, I want to kind of call you a pit bull. Not that you have that personality type, but with what you've done, you followed through. You investigated, you dug, and you didn't give up until you had to as a result of the lawsuit and such. But even then, you've shared your story. I know from my own personal experiences that transparency and accountability are missing within our healthcare system. And when things go wrong, instead of being accountable and transparent, there's a lot of cover-up things that happen. Let me ask you, what were the initial things that really raised flags with you? And what was it that got you to the point where you're like, all right, I'm not going to stand for this and I'm going to do something about it?
Well, I think there was two moments that really kind of, when I started, because you don't go in for a hip surgery and come out in a coma. It's just not, brain surgery is not a known risk factor for brain damage is not a known risk factor for hip surgery. Mm-hmm. So I knew that, even though I'm not a medical person, I knew that was not right. My mom was supposed to be up and walking, within a few hours, and now they're telling me that she's in a vegetative state. Like, that doesn't sound right. I had a little bit of an advantage because I had an aunt and an uncle who were a doctor and a nurse, and they were, telling me, they were giving me really good intel right away on what questions to ask, what records to get. I did get records. My uncle and aunt were afraid that the hospital was going to change the records, so they had me get the records right away.
Is that
when my uncle?
Can I ask real quick?
Yeah.
So the changing of the records, when they warned you that, obviously that's something that's kind of commonplace. I know it happened in my particular situation. The only way that I was able to catch on to it is the software left an edit header indicating that a record or edit had been done to the record. That's the only thing that drew our attention to that. When we dug further, they had actually changed 303 pages of my records, along with deleted 101 different interactions and encounters and office visits.
300?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Now, just to make a point of that, so HIPAA, which is a federal set of rules and laws that are supposed to protect us and our digital information, HIPAA violations are not something that a private citizen can actually go after. And so my experience was, trying to find the office to actually look into it, and then having them follow through. And to date, I have not been successful in that. I actually had to go to, are you familiar with what a HIM administrator is, Health Information Management?
No.
They're the people that institute the EHRs, or the electronic healthcare record systems at the hospitals, and they maintain them. There's one of the issues that I've come across is the amount of EHRs offered. So there's not a standard healthcare record system. And if you're familiar with a good company would be Adobe. They have all these different suites, Photoshop and Premiere and After Effects, all these different programs that are underneath the head of the title of Adobe, right? Same thing with the EHRs. You'll have customized EHRs per hospital, but they're not standardized. And so oftentimes when a hospital might be using a different healthcare record system than a hospital that is transferring records to that hospital, the coding might be different. The software might not be compatible in terms of integration. And so there's a lot of issues that'll take place as that's transferred, in my particular case. But all of those things for me were super eye-opening. So for you, obviously the recovery is not supposed to entail something as severe as what your mom was dealing with. That really threw some flags for you. How helpful was the hospital? Go ahead.
The hospital was not helpful at all. The hospital stopped talking to me because I was starting to ask too many tough questions. We found out that she lost a little bit of blood, but then when we got the records, we found out that she literally lost over half the blood in her body.
Right.
Half the blood volume in her body was lost during this 2-hour surgery that went 6, and no one told us that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's crazy. There's your big, like, what the...
Right.
And then my uncle, who's a doctor, he read the anesthesia records. These were handwritten anesthesia records during the surgery. And my mom maintained a relatively perfect 120/80 for 6 hours, which during this massive blood loss.
Right.
And what we later found out is when you lose over half the blood in your body, your blood pressure does not stay at 120/80 for 6 hours. Right. It tanks. It drops. So clearly these handwritten anesthesia records, as the experts in our trial testified to, all doctors, by the way, doctors on both sides, all said that the records were medically impossible in the history of science.
Mm-hmm.
So then I realized, okay, that means that I've got falsification of records, I've got massive loss of blood, and then I find out, as you may recall in the film, I find out that there was not an ICU doctor in the intensive care unit. They had replaced the ICU doctor with a camera doctor.
Right.
Out by the airport, and the camera wasn't on.
Just to clue our listeners in, so they have what's called EICU, which is an electronic camera that's supposed to watch the patients in recovery. And in Steve's particular case, his mother's camera was turned off, and they said that it was due to privacy issues, correct?
That is correct. It started like I wanted to, once we found out about the blood loss, then we realized, oh my God, if she lost over half the blood in her body,
mm-hmm.
and the records in surgery are questionable, then what happened in the ICU? Because her blood pressures dropped to below 50 over 30 repeatedly when she was in the intensive care unit. So we wanted to talk to the intensive care doctor who was there. And we were asked, can we please talk to the ICU doctor? Well, there wasn't one. Well, what do you mean there wasn't one? Well, it's an intensive care unit. Oh, we've got this thing called EICU, and there's a camera doctor out by the airport, and the camera wasn't on. And I said, well, you're replacing ICU doctors with camera doctors that aren't on. What? And she said, well, we don't, due to HIPAA laws, we don't like to, invade the privacy of the patient. And that's when I realized that was an Alice in Wonderland territory. This is like, now we're in insane land.
Right.
And so basically it was the falsification of the record, my mom losing half the blood in her body, and the records not matching up. A nurse actually went in and changed some of the records in the ICU, and this camera thing. Those are the fires that I could not let go for the next 10 years. I just couldn't do it.
Yeah, no. And part of the reason why I started this podcast, it's there's a lot of people that don't have the ability to even find a platform. And so for me, part of my interviews, not only of interesting people, are also people that just need a platform to tell their story, to raise awareness. And my hope is that this will be a platform for some of those people. Now, I know that as you dug into this, you had talked about an aunt and uncle that were a nurse and a doctor. I watched the Bleed Out documentary, and I was surprised when I saw how the willingness to help changed. And I'm wondering what kind of pressures that might be exerted by a hospital to even change, like a family member's want to participate in what you were doing.
Yeah, well, we're open about this in our film. Our film is, you led with accountability and transparency. This film, if anything, that's all this film is to me, is about, and we went through the whole thing as we made the film. Even the HBO attorneys, they went through every second of this film, and they couldn't believe some of the stuff that I was saying. And I had to prove and back up every single second of this movie, because a lot of this, as you saw, is kind of unbelievable. And as we know, not uncommon in medical. I mean, it's the third leading cause of death in America. So my uncle, who really was a hero in the early days, he was the one that really discovered the medical malpractice. My uncle really solved the crime. I think I probably would have figured it out, but it would have taken me years to figure out medically what really happened. When my uncle got the records, he knew exactly what happened within 10 minutes. And then as we got closer to, our litigation and our trial, which went 7 years, the closer we got to trial, my aunt, who was the nurse, she stayed in, but my uncle started to back out. And at one point, as you saw in the film, he completely backs out. And in fact, ends up committing perjury, which was easily one of the worst moments of my entire life, was because I was there when he did it. I was sitting next to him when he was under oath and was asked things, because he was the one because they were wondering, how did I figure out all this stuff? I'm a comedy guy. How did I know about hemoglobins and, blood pressures and, units of blood? And I said, I didn't know. It was my uncle. And then my uncle, under oath, as we approached trial, denied it. He denied it.
So that brings me back to that question. What kind of power, or what kind of, what would have changed your uncle's stance on all of this? What kind of leverage does the hospital have on doctors so that, when they're trying to be helpful and they're trying to put the patient first, whether it's family or even one of their, their patients, what kind of tools does the hospital use to get these doctors to, recant or to kind of drop out on some of these things that they're trying to be advocates for?
Well, I can tell you that from what I've learned since the film's been out, it's been out about a year and a half or so, and I've talked to many doctors and hospitals in the past, ever since it came out, and it's fear. A lot of times it's just fear. A lot of times hospitals will pressure doctors to, forget things. There's a sequence we have in the movie where I videotaped all of the depositions of all of the defendant doctors.
Yeah, that was great.
And one go-to line is to instead of being truthful, and we cut a whole montage of it in the film, because there was no other way for me. If I were to tell you this, you might believe me, but if I show it to you, under oath testimony by several doctors on camera, the go-to line is, I don't recall.
Right.
So, and I heard this 100 times at every deposition from every doctor. What happened to Mrs. Burrows in surgery? I don't recall. You remember talking to this other doctor? Oh, I don't recall. I don't. And it is over and over again. And that's their kind of convenient get out of jail pass to kind of, muddy the waters and kind of like make it more smoky. It's because things, some of this stuff is black and white, but they try to make it as muddy and gray as possible. In my uncle's case, he was an out-of-state doctor. He was from Ohio. This took all two place, Wisconsin. So we don't really think that the hospital or that corporation got to my uncle, but I do think that some of my uncle's doctor friends convinced him to not participate. You've heard of it's like with police officers, the code of silence.
Right.
There is one, it's called the white code of silence. And doctors generally don't like to sue doctors. Doctors are not going to rat on doctors in general. And my uncle, we believe my uncle just got cold feet as we got closer to our moment of truth in our day in court for my mom. Someone got to my uncle, and he ended up lying under oath, and it was horrible. It was horrible. But in our case, I think his doctor friends, peer pressure, something like that, I think is more probably what happened to him. But in other cases that I've heard, there's a lot of pressure from the hospitals. It all depends on the culture, by the way. I'm glad you asked this question. Yeah. Because there's a lot of hospitals out there that aren't like this. There's a lot of hospitals that have this culture of absolute transparency, absolute accountability, and apology. Mm-hmm. And they believe in it because it works.
Right.
It's actually better. It's better for them. It's better for the patients. It's better for the family. And it's cheaper because there won't be this incredible litigation.
Right.
People ask me all the time if I would have gotten an apology from the hospital and if they would have taken care of my mom, would I have sued? And I said, if someone from that hospital sat down and told me the truth about what happened to my mother, took responsibility for it, and apologized for it, do you honestly think I would spend 7 to 10 years of my life trying to sue them?
Right.
Not a chance. I just wonder what was best for my mother.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, that hospital decided to not do the right thing. They just didn't do it. But there are hospitals out there, and I've met them, who this is their policy. When something goes wrong, because we're all human and doctors are not God, everybody makes mistakes, including medical people, nurses, doctors, technicians. We all make mistakes. The question is, what do we do when we make a mistake?
Right.
And some of these, and it comes down to the culture of the hospital. And
in Wisconsin,
there's a ton of them out there, man.
In Wisconsin, just to interrupt a little bit, what you've talked about just now alluded to some of the things that you brought up in your documentary regarding Scott Walker's legislation that was put in. There was 3 really big ones that you touched on, and a couple you just mentioned. One is doctors don't have to testify against other doctors. Another one, correct. Another one is the I'm sorry law.
Yep.
And that's where, do you want to explain any of these so I don't get them wrong? So the doctor's not having to testify against other doctors. What does that entail? Does that mean that?
Yeah. I mean, there's an iron curtain. By the way, nobody knows this. The only people that really know this are, doctors and their lobby and the hospitals and the lawyers that actually, and the lawyers and the politicians that pass these laws. Mm-hmm. Normal people like you and I mean, I didn't know about any of this stuff until I got deep and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, you mean the laws, the legislation are stacked against the patients to protect the doctors and the hospitals from any wrongdoing? And I didn't even believe that. I said, that's so cynical. They wouldn't do that, would they?
Right.
Then we start finding out in my mom's case, yeah. And the one, you just mentioned the one, it's called the I'm sorry law, is that it's a relatively new law in the last 5 years. But a doctor can admit his guilt and say he's sorry And that admission of guilt and that apology cannot be used against him in any litigation. So if I cut off the wrong leg, if I cut off your leg, right? And I say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I read the x-ray backwards. I cut it off. I really feel bad about it. I'm very sorry. And you thank me for your apology, but you go get a lawyer anyway, because you need a leg, right? Because they're not, and that testimony that I just gave you, my confession to you, cannot be used against me.
Right.
That's called the outside law. The other one is the doctors don't testify against doctors. If a doctor, let's say you and I are in a surgery together, and let's say I'm the surgeon and you're the anesthesiologist, and you notice that I'm, let's say, intoxicated, that I shouldn't be operating, and something goes wrong. Or let's say something doesn't even go wrong, but you notice that I'm impaired, and something happens where there's a litigation down the road where I get accused of being impaired or intoxicated or something like that. And you knew that. And, and then the litigants or the plaintiff comes after you. They want to know what happened in that surgery. You are under no obligation to testify against your fellow doctors. I saw it every day. Yeah. Every day during this trial, I saw anytime, because there was 8 or 9 people in my mom's surgery, and we wanted to know what happened during that surgery. There's all these people there. And anytime they were asked a question about another doctor in that surgery, they would say, oh, Dr. Privilege, objection, Dr. Privilege. And that's the privilege of the doctor to not have to answer the question.
Right.
Which is the antithesis of, that's not accountability or transparency.
Right.
So yeah, and stuff like that, the people, that's another reason why I actually decided to make the film. Is I found out stuff like that I thought was so important that I literally didn't feel like I could live with myself unless I told other people what I'm finding out.
Right. There was one other point that your documentary made out along with the things that we just talked about, and that was the single person's law. So let me see if I get this right. If someone dies and they don't have children or a spouse, the family, and they died of, let's say, a medical error per se, the family can't then sue for the medical error that caused the death of their loved one. Only if that person was married or if they had children left behind would they be able to actually carry then a lawsuit for that. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And minor children, not adult children.
Okay, so minors.
So,
only.
and the reason I found out about that law is because this was directly related to my mom's case. My mom was, my mom had been divorced for 40 years from my father. She was single, raised my sister and I. My sister and I are adults, and my mom, when she was in a coma, I started talking to attorneys about what happened, and I told them exactly what I've been telling you and your audience, and they're like, "Oh my God, this is clear medical negligence. If your mom dies, there will be no case." I'm like, "What are you talking about? Like, if they kill her, there's no case." And they showed me the law, and their advice to me was do everything you can to keep your mom alive, because justice goes out the window if she. I'm like, how could this possibly? Who would ever come up with this law?
I felt the same way when I heard that.
On the book.
Yeah, and that was put in by Scott Walker. Is that correct? And I want to say 2014. I did a lot of research on this.
Yeah. I think that's correct. And I think there's a representative right now who I've become friends with, Representative Christine Zanicki.
Yes. And
she's just one of her first. Once she saw the film, one of the first things she's going to try to do is get that law overturned. She said that's just discrimination,
right,
against people who aren't married with no kids.
Right. Now, did you know, or did you dig into the HIPAA stuff? Because obviously when they adjusted or forged your mother's medical records, did you pursue looking into that? Did you find out those loopholes with HIPAA and private citizens not being able to sue for those HIPAA violations?
You know what? Peripherally, there were so many other fires burning in our... it was like one gigantic dumpster fire.
Yeah.
And there were so many, and I would say HIPAA was one of those things where, I was juggling 5 balls and that was like 6th ball. It was like, I couldn't dedicate the amount of time that I wanted to that, not only in our case, but also like even in our movie. There were so many things I wanted to get deeper in the film, like the Injured Patients Compensation Fund. Do you know all about that?
Yeah, for Wisconsin, the $1.5 billion.
Yeah.
Just to fill in our listeners, so that fund for Wisconsin is meant for medical. Is it medical injury? What's the name of that fund title?
The fund is entitled Injured Patients Compensation Fund, and it's for injured patients. Except that, and I'm living proof of this. I went through 7 years of advocating for an injured patient, my mother, and fighting every day in court against the Injured Patients Fund, because the Injured Patients Compensation Fund wants to do everything they can to not pay and compensate injured patients.
Bingo. And it does.
And that's why they're pushing $2 billion.
Yeah. And just to clarify, it does pay for the hospital's attorney fees, correct?
I think so, yeah.
So they have an unlimited, it does. It's an unlimited resource for hospitals to fund their attorneys. But the patients who are the victims, they don't get the same treatment. We have to come up with our own money. And the other thing that I found in Wisconsin that was very difficult to swallow was the fact that because medical malpractice is basically impossible unless you fit a very thin line of requirements. For instance, you die, you have a minor child left behind, or a husband. Right. Anything else, you can pretty much forget about trying to get a medical malpractice. Attorneys won't take them, especially on a contingency fee basis, because I think I spoke with actually your attorneys. Let's see, Hiller and Mann, or Hillman and Hersman and Mann, I think. Yeah. And they actually spent about an hour, 2 hours with me, kind of going over my own case, and they were not willing to take it because, obviously they had lost your case, but also all these other attorneys that were taking these cases, 92% or so are lost if they actually go to trial. So the idea is, if you can actually get an attorney to represent you, and it is on a contingency fee basis, you can pretty much kiss that goodbye. If you have money to put into it and you actually get someone that's willing to represent you, then it's kind of what you just went through, 7 to 10 years of legal battles and all of the things that are reinforcing these behaviors that are put into law, that we need to really overturn, and we need to do that sooner than later to really fix a lot of these issues that we have. It's my opinion that. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
No, you go.
Well, I was just going
to say the one thing that really irks me to this day is I was unable to successfully address the Injured Patients Compensation Fund in the film, in Bleed Out, because it's such a racket. Mm-hmm. It is so wrong. Like they tout it as if it's this wonderful fund that if something goes wrong with a patient, that they're there to compensate the family and the patient, and look at all this money that we take from everybody to make this huge fund. They spend that money to never touch that money. Right. And it's so offensive to me. And I just couldn't figure out a way. We had so much going on in the movie. We only had 90 minutes in the movie. I couldn't. The Injured Patients Compensation Fund, it's almost its own movie.
Right.
You know?
Can I ask?
And I just couldn't. Go ahead.
Bring up some of the things that you found regarding the Injured Patient Fund that you just kind of the peaks that you can kind of draw attention to through this. What are the big problems? What have you noticed?
Well, and I can send you something that somebody recently just sent me. You may have access to it as well. I'm stunned at the amount of money. Like when it started in 2000, when I started my case in 2009 and 10, mm-hmm. I think there was like $200 million in this fund.
Right.
And now they're pushing $2 billion.
It's ridiculous.
It's like, what? Who's got $2 billion laying around in Wisconsin?
Right.
Well, the Injured Patients Compensation Fund does. Where's that money coming from? Where's that money going? Well, it's only growing, and they could have taken a 1% of 1% of that money
mm-hmm.
and taking care of my mother. But no, that's not what they did. They, as you said, they spent that money. They spent part of that money on defending. I mean, they fought, speaking of pit bulls, they fought like pit bulls every day in court, every deposition, to make sure that that money was never going to my mother.
Right.
Or, by the way, any of you injured patients out there.
Right.
It's rare when they settle. And there's a whole break. I can send you actual, if you want me to, I can send you
absolutely,
this, like,
Steve.
3 or 4 page. You'll love it. I mean,
I'll also put that in the link for our
within the last
description.
month.
That way people that are listening to this can also look at that as well.
Yeah. It's a guy who works at the state capitol actually sent it to me. And let me just write this down real quick, because I'll send it to you right after we get off here.
Sounds great.
Injured Patients Compensation Fund document. This thing, it's hot off the presses. It's like whenever the last, they're proud of it too. They're like, hey, look, we got almost $2 billion. Look at what we're doing.
Right.
But they're not doing anything except collecting money.
Right.
And protecting the money. Then they have the gall to call it the Injured Patients Compensation Fund. I mean, that just irks me. Oh my God. my blood's boiling right now. But people got to know about it.
Absolutely.
Because I didn't know anything about it. When I first heard about it, the Injured Patients Compensation Fund. Great. You mean there's a fund that's going to help take care of my mom?
Right.
No. No. That's there. It's making somebody rich.
Right.
I'm not sure who's actually in the end benefiting from that, but
it seems like
it's a racket. I say that with all due respect. That is one racket right there.
Right. I would like to see some of the behind the scenes of that myself. I have shaken my head and pulled my hair out plenty as I went through my own journey on this. Getting to your story again, we kind of left off with your mom and the things that had happened. Your mom then got out of the hospital and she had brain damage and also mobility issues. Is that correct?
That's right. She lost, she was cognitively, she was incompetent. Her IQ dropped from 120 to 60. And she lost, she had spastic paraplegic, basically lost the use of her legs and her bladder due to lack of oxygen to the brain during this coma. The coma was the thing that caused all of her problems.
Gotcha. I'm looking at...
She never came out.
I'm looking at, you started We Stand With Judy, which is a GoFundMe site. Putting that out there for our listeners.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Judy Burrows, Steve's mom, passed away January 30th of 2020. She had been dealing with the complications from the injuries she suffered from the 2009 routine partial hip replacement since that time, and was in a assisted living home for the last part of her life. And
last 10 years.
Yeah. So 10 years, and then you started working on not only trying to take care of your mom, but also telling the story. Mentally, that had to be hell. I can only imagine. How has that affected you and changed you the last 10 years or so?
Well, thank you for asking that. I would say profoundly. I used to, be just my whole life was comedy. I got up in the morning. My job was to make people laugh, think of things to write or perform or direct that were funny. And, I missed that life. I really do, because it was fun. I mean, it was silly and fun, and we need laughter.
Right.
But, then this thing happened to my mom. It was like a 3-pronged war. It really was a siege. It was, number one was taking care of her. Number 2 was getting her justice for what clearly was, gross medical negligence. And number 3 was, if that didn't work, to tell the story. Maybe in a film type situation. I didn't come up with that idea for a while, but
what got you into it? What spurred you to develop this into a movie? I know that you've been doing a video diary, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I was told by our attorneys, our medical malpractice attorneys, right away to start filming my mom's pain and suffering for a jury down the road. It would be years, but we'd want to see, and it was difficult for me to do this, to film, stick a camera in front of my mom who can't talk and can't walk.
Right.
And it was really difficult, but I knew that it was in her best interest to show people what had happened to her. And after years of this, I had an editor friend of mine who was looking at some of this stuff, and he was fine. I was telling him everything I've been telling you about the laws and the Injured Patients Compensation Fund and how 90% of the cases like ours lose. And he said, I think you have a movie here. And I go, really? I really didn't think I did, but then when I found out it was the third leading cause of death in America, and I saw that we were not alone. For years I thought we were alone. I thought it was just a one-off horrible thing that happened to my mom. Mm-hmm. And I realized, there's hundreds of thousands of people this has happened to. And I thought, well, I'm in a unique position here to maybe, I'm my mom's voice. Certainly I'm her advocate, and maybe I could, at least share this information that I've learned through this journey with other people, because it affects all of us. We're all patients. We all have family members who are patients.
Right.
Nobody intentionally wants to no doctor or hospital wants to intentionally hurt somebody. But when things go wrong, which they do occasionally, how are people going to conduct themselves? And I just felt like, well, I'm going to actually take my storytelling skills, if I can, and I'm going to tell the story of my mother. And once I decided to do that, I'm kind of an all or nothing guy. I'm either in or I'm out. And once I'm in, I'm all in. And, the next thing 10 years have passed. And,
does it feel like 10 years?
I was very fortunate.
No.
10 years. My mom was down.
Does it feel like 10 years, or has it gone by really quick, or does it seem like a lot longer?
Both. It definitely feels like 10 years, but I remember things that happened in 2009 and 10, because there was a whole trial about all that stuff too. So, my mom's entire case comes down to 12 hours, like a 12-hour period. And I can tell you right now, pretty much what happened in those 12 hours. Better than I can tell you what in the last 12 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's become a part of me. And now that it's a movie, and now that it's gotten out there and people have seen the film and it's resonated with other family members and patients, and her story, she was aware that we were doing this. She always felt that if her story could help other people, she was all for it. And so we tried to share with her all the wonderful things that happened since the movie came out, and she did get to experience some of it.
Oh, that's great.
We showed it to Congress 3 days before she passed away.
Yeah. It's been an amazing journey that you have been on as a crusade for your mom, and also for all of us that are dealing with these policies and approaches by the hospital administration or administrators to, again, it's based on policy. And so some hospitals are very open and transparent. Others are not. We need to get them open and transparent. I think that not doing that can cause more injury to someone that's already been injured, which then becomes much, much worse as a result of what you're putting them through, rather than just having accountability and transparency.
Agreed. I had a great doctor tell me late last fall, and I'll share it with you, and he's a physician, and his whole thing is that first harm, meaning the negligence, the actual harm itself, medical harm, is never intentional.
Right.
He said, but the second harm, and the third harm, and the fourth harm, the denying, the delaying, the denying, the defending. In my mom's case, all those years of all of the people under oath, not telling the truth, never taking responsibility, never being accountable, never being transparent. This doctor said when he saw your movie, he goes, all the things that happened after your mom's surgery were just as harmful, if not more harmful, than the actual original sin.
Yep.
And those were intentional.
Right.
When those doctors lied under oath, that's intentional. When that hospital decided those records are not, when the doctors falsified the records, when that nurse went in and changed the records, that was not unintentional. I mean, that's where you get into some dark stuff,
Right.
And it doesn't have to be that way. We all know, third graders know, when you do something wrong, you do the right thing. We all know this. I don't understand why it's so hard.
Ethics.
Well, they're worried about money.
Yep.
Well, you're going to make more money if you're honest, if you're going to be the honest hospital that does it right.
Right. I agree with that 100%. I'm thinking to myself, how much of your story has been since your mom's medical error, or however we want to coin that. But when her injuries came from the result of the treatment, that's kind of changed the course of your guys' life. And also, now that she's gone, also that's probably what she's remembered for the most. Let me ask you, putting all of that aside, tell me about your mom. Share who she was before all of this. What's her real story, rather than just being, a face of this kind of movement that we're going through right now. I want to know a little bit about her. Obviously, wonderful mom, single mom for most of your life. What are the best memories? What's the biggest thing that she instilled in you?
Well, you know what? I'll tell you what, my mom was incapable of lying. My mom couldn't lie if she tried. And when she tried, it was kind of painful to watch. She just couldn't do it. It's just not in her. And she taught my sister and I to just, this honesty thing. It really works, It's not always painless, but if you're not lying, you never have to remember you're lying.
Right. Yeah.
And my mom always, she taught us to be straight and honest. She had a great sense of humor. She was a teacher. She taught special ed for 30 years in the Milwaukee public school system. She was a wonderful teacher. She cared so much about her students. They weren't normal students. These were students that were troubled, and they all had, cognitive issues, mm-hmm. which it was not lost on her that she became, she at one point, she said, I taught special ed, and now I am special ed. So she was, she was so full of life. She traveled the world. She tapped into, a friend of her took her to Turkey about 25 years ago, and she just fell in love with Turkey and fell in love with a Turkish man and went to see him every summer for like 20 years. And she loved music. She loved to sing. She was, she saved her money. I always tell this story because it's true. She always saved her money for a rainy day because she was single and she couldn't rely on anyone other than herself. So she would save her money, and she saved $200,000. Oh. Took her 50 years to save $200,000 in a school teacher's wage.
Right.
And she lost all $200,000 of that within 2 years of her coma, paying for her injuries that were inflicted upon her.
Right.
And that's not right. That was another thing that it just pissed me off that she lost everything.
Right.
She did everything right. She did everything right.
Yeah.
And so she was easy to fight for, because not only did she have so many things go wrong with her care, there was a lack of caring too. It was like, it wasn't that they just screwed up. They didn't care. And I think you can see it from some of the doctors in the movie.
Yeah.
And their on-camera testimony. You can see it. If they care, boy, it sure doesn't look like it.
Right. No, I agree.
And my mom was just the opposite. She was full of love and full of caring. And even when people wronged her, she still, the main surgeon in our film, who was responsible for my mom's surgery, Dr. Bauer. He was our family friend. And I don't get to tell this story too often, but he was, my mom spent a lot of years afterwards feeling bad for Dr. Bauer. This guy who actually injured her was responsible for half of her blood loss and her cognition being shot, her inability to walk. loses everything because this guy didn't do the right thing and didn't tell the truth. And my mom felt bad for him. She goes, I wonder about Dr. Bauer. Does he still like me? This is the stuff I'd be dealing with my mother.
Right. I think that
still
says,
loved Dr. Bauer.
Well, and that just speaks wonders of the person that she was. She wasn't a bitter person. She wasn't a hateful person. She was a caring, loving person that gave to everyone that was in her life. And her story, who she was, the things that she instilled in others, the love and leading by example, especially obviously with you and your sister. It attaches a face to the story. It's a lot of people will hear, all right, this lady had this happen and this is her story. It's nice when you can connect a little bit with the actual person. So this was a special ed teacher, someone that gave to the community, someone that gave and set examples for her kids, that ended up having this thing ruin her life and change her life in a way that as the people that are running these organizations that might hear this, shame on you guys. We need to change this. We need to have transparency and accountability. We need to operate ethically, and make sure that,
yes.
When things do happen, which again, medical errors are the third leading cause of death in America. So this is happening to thousands, hundreds of thousands of people every year. We need transparency, because the worst thing that you can do is be dismissive or closed off, or you don't provide the answers that families are looking for during this time.
Right.
So,
for me, it's just, every time they would not tell me the truth, or there would be some type of obfuscation or type of like withholding of information, never taking any responsibility, that just poured gasoline on the fire that was already burning for me.
Yeah.
It wasn't like, I was lucky because I don't have children. I have a wonderful wife who completely believed in this. I'm in show business, so I didn't have a normal 9-to-5 job. We didn't know it was going to go 10 years, but I was in a unique position to do this. And my mom, being a teacher, we started to see, once the film came out, we started to see, when we started to hear from all the doctors and the reaction to the film. We were so fortunate with the reaction to the film, with millions of people saw it through HBO. But the big surprise was the medical community. I was a little hesitant. I thought the medical community they're not going to like this movie. But it's just the opposite. The hospitals and doctors and nurses and medical schools and universities, they've embraced this movie as a teaching moment, really.
Yeah. That doesn't surprise me, because what I've noticed in my own journey is the frontline workers, the doctors and nurses that we see in the hospitals, they want to be transparent. They want to be helpful. They want to, be that way. It's the hospital administration, on the other hand, that calls the shots on that. And that, again, is a policy, an inter-hospital policy that needs to change.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, I was so pleasant. The big surprise here, and I got to tell my mom this, she passed away in January, and the movie was out for a full year. And anything we got, all the great reviews that we were fortunate enough to get, and all the articles, and people wanted to meet her and send her videos, and maybe you saw on the hashtag We Stand with Judy, all those. Did you see the video of all the doctors at the Washington Monument?
I sure did.
Saying We Stand with Judy.
Yeah.
Now that I showed my mom that, and she just watched that over and over and over, because she started to see really that her story was resonating with doctors and nurses and pharmacists and surgeons and radiologists. And they said her name. They're looking right at the camera saying, I'm a nurse and I stand with Judy.
Yeah.
That's when I realized that this thing was no longer even our movie. It was like it was now Judy's story is now that's my mother's legacy. And I told somebody recently that, we're on hold right now because of the COVID thing. We've had to postpone her memorial. But when we do it, she was cremated. We were very happy, but her headstone we've decided is going to say Judy Burrows, born a teacher, died a teacher.
That's so fitting.
And that's because many hospitals have written to me saying your mother's story is saving lives. And that's the big surprise for me. I thought hospitals would hate this movie.
So you just went to Capitol Hill with this story. I know that you and Christine, is it Sinicki or Sinichi? I always say it wrong.
Sinicki.
Okay. So Christine Sinicki is a state representative for Wisconsin. I actually reached out to her and met with her a couple months ago. And
good.
She is a wonderful lady. Anybody that might be
Speaking
listening
of pit
go ahead.
Speaking of pit bulls,
yeah.
Right there. She's a pit bull.
Yes, she is pleasant until you get her ticked off, that's for sure. Or she's on a mission trying to change something. She's
tough.
She's a wonderful person. The reason that I brought her up is that anyone that's going through this kind of thing, if you're listening to this program right now and you're trying to figure out what are my first steps, how do I get help? It's few and far between. I found that reaching out to our state representatives are probably one of the avenues that we definitely want to explore. It puts you on their radar. It shares your voice to the people that are actually trying to advocate for legislative changes. And I know that Christine is really an advocate for trying to change a lot of the medical malpractice or medical error issues in our state, and how we're dealing with those people that are actually victimized as a result of those things. So did you meet her early on, or was that after the movie came out? How did you?
After the movie, she actually she contacted me. I did not know her. I think one of her constituents saw the film and told her about it, and she watched it multiple times. Called me cold, and I of course got right back to her because she was, she's a lawmaker. She has she has the power to initiate legislation, and she cares. And she also, she wanted to meet my mother, which still means so much to me. It wasn't just like she wasn't trying to use my mother as an opportunity to further her own agenda.
Right.
She wanted to meet my mom, and I told my mom about her. And, my mom couldn't really talk. I said, "There's this woman," and Christine's met her. I think at least 3 times.
Yeah, Christine talked to her about her to me and the times that they'd gotten together. Just to let you know, which you probably do already, Christine has such a warm spot in her heart for your mom and your family and your story. And she really expressed that when I met with her. So I just wanted to share that with you because she's such a wonderful person.
Oh, thank you. She is. Yeah. And I'll never forget. She was so good with my mom too, because a lot of people, she couldn't really talk, and she was just trapped in this wheelchair, trapped in her own body.
Sure.
And Christine came in and it's like they knew each other for years. And my mom just took to her instantly. And, in fact, we saw it, I think there's a picture. I think Christine came to see her about 3 weeks before my mom passed away. And there's a picture of all of us at the assisted living facility, and mom was looking pretty good that day. And, I didn't really want visitors. And I said, well, what about Christine? You want to see Christine Sinicki again? And she just lit up. And Christine comes in, she's just all full of life. Mm-hmm. And I will love Christine forever for the way she treated my mother.
I am thankful that she's one of our state representatives, and I'm thankful that we have a person like that cares enough, that's trying to make changes. Anybody that's listening, if you had the opportunity to support Christine, or she has a movement called Medical Heirs of Wisconsin, Wisconsin Medical Heirs on Facebook. There we go. I'll put a link to that as well. She is the one person in our legislature, in Wisconsin legislature, that's trying to make these changes to try to help people in our particular situation. Anything that our listeners can do to be supportive of Wisconsin Medical Heirs, or any type of legislature that comes up that we can support, I encourage you all to do what you can. Many people make a large voice, and those are the things that are going to create the change that we're needing to have happen in the U.S. as a result of all of this. Let me wrap this by asking, I know that you're currently promoting Bleed Out Still. You just went to Capitol Hill. Looks like this is now global too. It's raised a global awareness. What's in the future for Steve Burrows? What's in the future for you? Regarding this, and also, are you working on any comedies currently? When can we see something more from you in that world?
Well, I appreciate the question. My wife just asked me the same question this weekend. Steve, what are you going to do? I go, well, I'd love to get back to comedy. I have been tinkering on a couple scripts, over these past years that I haven't been able to finish, that I'm very close on. One is a drama, but one is an absolute crazy comedy. And right now, certainly in my world and in the world of, coronavirus, I'm now running toward the comedy. But having said that, this patient safety, medical error, accountability, transparency thing is in my blood now.
Yeah.
It's part of me. And it's always going to be a part of me. And I don't know, I thought it might be interesting to do, especially with the coronavirus. It'd be interesting based on what I've seen in just the last 2 years since the movie came out a year and a half ago, is to maybe somehow put together a TV series, not a fictional one, but a real one, like a real, documentary series of something that takes a look at all aspects of everything that we're going through. Because we're all patients, we're all families of patients. And now, more than ever, coronavirus, any one of us could be a patient like tomorrow.
Yeah.
So,
since you brought that
but
up,
I do want to do something with humor again, because I miss that.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of, but things are different now too. If I could blend the two somehow, boy, that would be the best of both worlds. If I could really figure out a way to, do something, or maybe it's just separate projects. Maybe the comedy thing is its own thing, and I gotta get back to work.
Yeah.
I miss show business.
Sure.
In the end,
in
I'm a showbiz guy.
Turning this chapter in your life too, and putting the things in place that you have, it's one of those times where, now you can focus on other things because you've finished this chapter. You've raised awareness. You've started a movement. I don't know if you've envisioned yourself being the crusader that you've become, but all of us are thankful for you. I am thankful for you. During some of my dark times, as I went through this medical crap that I went through, it was validating seeing your story, because, we have this envision of our healthcare of it being completely different than the way that it is. We envision it being, for lack of better words, the way it should be: open, transparent. They're always looking out for the best for us. And, that's my perception of it previous to all the stuff that I have been involved with. If we can, change the issues, it will change our state and our country. Instead of medical errors being the third leading cause of death, that will be something that hopefully we'll talk about and say, you know what, we had to do this, this, and this, and now our healthcare is so much better. And we can then act as an example for other countries. For as much as we like to boast America's wealth and power and technology, we're not implementing it the way that it could and should be. So with that said, your story and the things that you and your family have gone through, while it wasn't an intent for you to become this crusader, you were probably the best person to raise this kind of awareness. And you did it in a way that made sense, was understandable to the ordinary guy, and really resonated in a lot of us here in America, because we've all experienced something or know someone that's experienced something as a result of medical errors being the third leading cause of death. It's touching every family in our country. So go ahead.
I was going to thank you. I mean, your very, very kind words mean a great deal to me. It kind of makes the whole thing worth it, because I'll just say thank you. That really means a great deal. Thank you.
Sir, it's meant a lot to me, even for you to take the time to talk with me today on Digital Voices. Your story has touched my life. Your example has given me strength in the times that I was weak. And I've gone through the tunnel and coming out on the other side in a much better way than I was originally. And a lot of that has to do with your documentary, the work that you put in, and your own story. And so I can't thank you enough myself, because indirectly you empowered me to understand things that then I could then treat appropriately, rather than just being lost in the fog of, is this really happening to me?
Right.
So,
yeah.
So with that,
well, that means I can't wait to play it for my wife so she can hear your lovely words, because that's the kind of stuff that keeps me going too. When my tank is empty and I'm feeling, I've had my bad days, and I know you've had yours, and so just a little bit of, I don't need a lot of gas, but give me a little gas and I'll get going again,
Yeah.
And my mom, when I would hear things like, "What's this beautiful thing you just told me?" I wish my mom could have heard that. She did know that her life was making a difference, and
are you spiritual at all?
What's that?
I said, are you spiritual? Are you a man of faith?
I am spiritual. I'm not religious per se, but I'm kind of counting on it there being something there, because I'm praying all the time, and I want to believe, and I'm counting on it in some way. Maybe I shouldn't be, but I am.
We all are.
There's got to be.
But I firmly believe with that same coin that your mom is fully aware. She's looking down, for lack of better words. And hopefully, when we all meet again, we'll have a great story to talk about. But until then, what you're doing, the impacts that you've made, the impacts that your mother's story has brought to all of us, is just beyond words. And I just thank you for the time and effort that you put in creating this, fighting for your mom, but also to have shared that in such a public way. All of us that have been watching bleed out, and the things that have come from this movement that started to grow, all of us are just very appreciative and thankful for the efforts that you put in. So with that said, I want to just thank you for spending this time. Is there anything that you'd like to share with us or tell us, anything that we can look forward to that you might have coming out, anything regarding the movie, anything that you want to catch us up on before I let you go today?
Well, yeah, there's two quick things. One is that just actually last week, Bleed Out is going international. We had an international sales agent who saw the film, and it's almost impossible to get these folks because they're, very few films kind of go worldwide kind of thing.
Sure.
But someone in London who specializes in taking films worldwide saw the film, fell for my mom, fell for her story, the American healthcare system, and everything that we're going through worldwide now with the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And Bleed Out is going international, which, boy, I wish my mom could. I'm hoping that she's listening here. She can see that this is no longer just an American movie.
Yeah, no.
Judy's gone international.
Yeah.
And the other thing I will tell you that not a lot of people know yet, but, when she passed away, January, her hospice nurse, wonderful person, filled out the death certificate and listed it as natural causes. And I was just, I was so heartbroken. My mom died, and I've been fighting all of these fights, and I just didn't have the energy. I looked at the death certificate as natural causes, and I'm like, well, it's not natural causes. I mean, she was injured here. Right. But I was just, I was just distraught. I wasn't even thinking straight. And our funeral director, a woman named Megan, who was this beautiful human being, she looked at the death certificate and she said, "That's not right. Natural causes. That's not right, Steve." I go, well, I know, but what am I going to do? I just fought World War V.
Right.
Does it matter? She goes, well, this is the funeral director. She goes, I said, does it matter? She goes, well, didn't I just watch a movie called Bleed Out where you were trying to get accountability and transparency and the truth? And I'm like, oh my God, she's right. she's right. I said, but what can we do? She goes, well, I can't really do anything, but I could run it up the flagpole, and I could have, the medical examiner take a look at your mom's case. And, I can't promise you that they're going to change the death certificate, but because it's pretty rare when they do that. But she goes, I don't believe that this is correct, and I think that the medical examiner is going to want to get it right. So I said, okay, let's do it. And she ran up the flagpole. She wrote, I don't know, I'm not even sure technically what she did, but all of a sudden the Wisconsin Medical Examiner's Office was looking, they're taking a hard look at this. They watched the film, and they ended up looking at all my mom's records, that whole time over the past 10 years. And I got a call from one of the medical examiners late one night, and they said, we are changing your mom's medical certificate of death from natural causes to accidental due to multiple hip surgeries or due to complications from multiple hip surgeries, et cetera, it's medical error. And
that's got to be validated.
Right now,
go ahead.
Of all the things that I've been fighting, to have that death certificate changed from natural causes to accident, mm-hmm. on top of all the wonderful things that have happened since the film came out, that to me, for whatever reason, to have a medical examiner look at the record and go, you know what? This ain't right.
Right.
Natural causes ain't right. This was not natural. This was accidental. And therein lies the story of my mom's life.
Yeah.
Right there, medical error and accountability and transparency. And in the end, the person who got to write the very last line of the last chapter of my mom's life, they got it right. And that really means something to me.
Yeah. I can relate to that. I understand how you're feeling. It's also kind of closure in a way, I would think, to a certain extent, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. When I got them in the mail, I mean, it's not like, I sit around reading my mom's death certificate all day, but
right.
Every once in a while, I will, in the last couple tough months here, I just go, we saw so much subterfuge and so much dishonesty and so much just not doing the right thing. To have somebody like our funeral director care enough about my mother in depth, knowing that in the end it's not going to make a lick of difference to anybody anymore. but it did to this funeral director, and then it did to the medical examiner. They're like, "Uh-oh, we got to get this right." They don't want to look foolish,
right?
And they looked at the record and they said, "It's not natural. It's accidental."
Yeah.
Due to complications from multiple hip surgeries. And I'm like, yeah, that's exactly what we made a movie about.
Right.
That's what the lawsuit was about. That's like the first line in our lawsuit.
Right.
So they got it right, and not a lot of people know about that one yet. So that's some breaking news there for you.
Well, it's just validating, and it's a closing of that chapter.
That's what it is. Validating. That's it.
I think for all of us that have gone through this, just getting validation is number one. That would make a huge stride in making things a little bit better for everyone. Acknowledging what we went through, and just at least validating it instead of, some of the things that they do to some of us can make us feel like we're a little crazy sometimes as we're trying to figure this out. I just, we don't pick our stories. Where you started out in life, this is probably the last spot that you'd ever figure yourself being in. But at the same time, there's a plan behind everything, and the skills that you picked up put you in a position to be able to tell the story and to be able to advocate for both your mom as well as this problem within our system. And I just can't thank you enough for the time that you put in, the frustration that you put in. Like you said, you didn't think it was going to be 10 years that you'd be battling this. And my biggest wish for you is that you can find your comedy, that you can find your laughter and express it in a new movie so that all of us can laugh with you.
Wow, that's beautiful. Well, I'm gonna take you up on that advice, because I probably need to do that. My mom would want me to do it. But then again, the other great thing about this tragedy has been I've gotten to meet people like yourself, and folks just like you who've experienced horrible things, who have been injured, who have been harmed, and who have not been validated, who have not had their day in court, who have not had an opportunity to tell their story in a way that we got to. And I feel like I definitely take that responsibility very seriously. As serious as I did for my mother. When you get to, I've met you now, and when you meet some of the people that I met too, my mom didn't die. She lived.
Right.
What about the people who got killed?
Right.
I have incredible human beings, families who lost their children, their husband, their wives, as bad as my mom had it, and it was bad. She did not lose her life. She did lose her life. In the end, she was killed by medical harm. But, so many people have it so much worse, and I take that responsibility very seriously, because a lot of people just don't have the opportunity. They don't have the voice.
Right.
That I had the opportunity, once I got HBO too, it's like, I'm not going to blow this. I'm going to run with this, because this is life and death, and it's serious. And I can't understand why we can't all agree on this.
Right.
Why are we not 100% all on the same page on this?
I agree. And that's a question that, because we like to think that everybody thinks the same way we do, it doesn't fit with our morals or principles to act that way. So the fact that there are these huge institutions that are out there acting in this manner blows my mind, and it is something that's always been difficult for me to understand. And I chalk it up to money and lobbyists and big business kind of stuff. What are your thoughts on it?
I think you can. I think that's exactly it. It's the old cliche. It's money. They have a lot to fear. People. Half the time, they don't really want, when something goes wrong, they don't want to admit it, because they feel like it's going to cost them more money.
Mm-hmm.
When in reality, it'll actually cost you less money if you just own up. Well, they think that there's going to be more lawsuits. They will we'll look weak. We'll look weak if we settle. We'll look weak if we admit, that's just the wrong way to approach it.
Agreed.
They got it backwards. Accountability, transparency, and apology works. It's going to be cheaper. If you make a mistake, like this is what I learned from the really good hospitals when they screw up. When they make a mistake, they not only share the information with all of their other doctors and nurses. So, by the way, that mistake doesn't get made again. But they also share it with the family to give the family a little bit of closure. That little thing about that validation that, they're not crazy.
Right.
They're not insane. They're not going down the rabbit hole of insanity. It's money, man.
Yeah. When you said that, it's a thought that I've had. It's been the Alice in Wonderland scenario where I wish I would have taken the blue pill. Once you start going down that rabbit hole and you realize the issues that it's not just one thing, it's an overall way of operating that needs to change. And, the only way to get to that point is by revamping some of our legislature that enables some of these things to happen. And the other is to embrace the fundamental idea of transparency and accountability and honesty. That to me would go a long way in repairing the relationship that a hospital has with the patient. It can completely destroy a relationship with the patient if you lie to them and you cover up things. And, it's at the end of the day, we're all in need of a hospital at one time or another as we get older. And it would be nice to think that, when we get to those spots that they're going to be as good as they can be. God forbid a medical error happens or something happens, and then you go through what we've gone through. So anybody listening to this, if you can support any of these referendums, if you can support any of the movements like Wisconsin Medical Error, any of the support that you can show for Steve Burrows as his movie becomes a global sensation, please do. I'm going to include links for the Bleed Out documentary. Also, if you'd like to send me anything that you'd like me to post in the description, be more than happy to do that. Before I let you go, I want to turn this whole thing around. I saw a post and I want to hear it from your mouth. It's about Little Richard. So we just lost Little Richard, and you had posted something about meeting him. Would you share that story with our listeners?
Sure. Yeah. I've been living out here in Hollywood for, it seems like forever now. I've been here for 25 years now. And I actually lived in Hollywood, like actual Hollywood proper, for 14 years. And my editor and I we were working on a Sunday and cutting some commercials. And we went over to this place called Roscoe's House of Waffle and Chicken. Have you ever heard of it before?
I haven't.
Yeah, it's kind of a down and dirty place. It's always kind of packed, but it's kind of a little rough. But it's got chicken and waffles, so you got to go. And we were there on a Sunday, and we're sitting there waiting for our chicken and our waffles, and this incredibly well dressed man. I mean, like, really, I just remember he was impeccable. Came up to the table and he said, "Would you gentlemen like a Bible? Gift of Little Richard." I'm like, "What? What are you talking about?" Like, Little Richard. Little Richard? He goes, "Yeah." And I knew from my mom's 45 albums, little 45s.
Right.
As a kid, I listened to her 45s, and she had all this Little Richard stuff, and all these songs were written by someone by the name of Richard Penniman, who I knew that was Little Richard's real name, was Richard Penniman. So the guy says, "Do you want this Bible from Little Richard?" And I seem to remember that Little Richard had turned into a preacher too at some point. And I thought, oh, but the guy was here. He was in Roscoe's House of Chicken and Waffles. So I figured, maybe Little Richard is here, like for real.
Right.
I looked around, I didn't see him. And I said, so Little Richard? He goes, yeah. I said, Richard Penniman, Little Richard? And I just said like, that was like saying open sesame.
Sure.
It was like the pass to get me into the back room. So this guy disappears, comes back about 5 minutes later and says, would you like to meet Little Richard? And I'm like, yes, absolutely. So I'm ushered back to the kitchen of Roscoe's Habit Chicken and Waffles. And there's a private dining room back there. And it's a long table. And everyone's in their Sunday best. And at the head of the table is what appears to be Little Richard, like the Little Richard. And I walk up and this guy, he escorts me back here. He says, this is the gentleman that I told you. And apparently the fact that I knew Little Richard was Richard Penniman, who actually wrote these songs as well. And that's like, that's one thing I've learned from musicians. Mm-hmm. They love singing them, but boy, writing them is really, that's the tricky part.
Sure.
And, Little Richard was tutti frutti, right? So here I am, escort, and he's in a wheelchair. He's kind of frail, but he's in a wheelchair, and he's in a lavender, kind of pinkish lavender suit, and he's got the bouffant. The bouffant is all just perfect, and he's covered in perfume. He smells delightful.
Sure.
And he says, I put my hand out, and he takes my hand with both of his hands and holds it, and he won't let go, And he says, I understand you know my work, son. And I said, know your work? Are you kidding? And I thanked him for his Bible. That was the first thing I did. And then I thanked him for basically inventing rock and roll. He's, without question, one of the 2 or 3 architects of rock and roll with Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley and Big Mama Thornton. I mean, mm-hmm. there's a short list there. Chubby Checker.
Yep.
That's Domino. There's like 4 or 5 of them.
Yeah.
And Little Richard, I mean, there was nobody like him. And I told him, I said, look, and I just remember, I just didn't want to say the wrong thing. So I just spoke from my heart. I said, sir, without you, there's no Beatles, there's no Rolling Stones, there's no Elvis Presley. And he goes, thank you. And he was so grateful that I said it. Like, who am I? I'm just like a guy who was having chicken and waffles, and some guy comes up to me and wants to give me a Bible from Little Richard. I'm not going to turn that down. Oh, I remember I did say, if I accept this Bible, or I will accept this Bible if I can actually thank him personally. And that's how the whole Richard Penniman thing came up. And, because I read the fine print on those little 45s, it got me back in to meet Little Richard.
That's awesome.
And it was just, and he smelled, like flowers. And I had my moment with him. I had about 5-10 minutes with him. And then I came home and I was, I smelled, my hand was just covered in Little Richard. My wife comes home and, I don't wear cologne or anything like that. I'm just not, it's not what I do. And she came in, she goes, you kind of smell good. What is that? And I held out my hand. I had her sniff my hand. I said, what do you think of that? She goes, that smells lovely. What is that? I go, that's Little Richard Penniman. That's Mr. Wop Bop Loop Bop Lop Bam Boom, who I met today, and no one can take that away from me.
Yeah.
And that's a true story. That was one of those great, stuff tends to happen to me, good, bad, and ugly, and that's one of the good ones.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciated that story because I myself grew up with Little Richard with my parents in 45s. I'm 46. I'm not sure. How old are you?
Mm-hmm. I'm 57.
You look good for your age, sir. Keep doing what you're doing.
Oh, thank you.
But thank you. So when you share that story and Little Richard just passed away, I thought that was special and I wanted you to share it. So thank you for doing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, no, I got an opportunity that he was so nice and so, I don't know, he's the guy who was in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. I mean, he's one of the guys who actually invented rock and roll. And you'd think this would be like, he'd be egomaniacal or narcissistic. And it was just the opposite. He was so humble and like so surprised that I knew his real name and that I gave him credit for, there's a quote that, and he didn't tell me this, but he told a member of the press is not too long before he died, is that he said if he had a problem with Elvis Presley being the king of rock and roll, he said, well, Elvis Presley may be the king of rock and roll, but I'm the queen. And I'm like, that is Little Richard right there, man.
Oh yeah.
And nobody like that did.
It's an amazing story.
Yeah.
So with that said, I'm going to end this podcast, but say Little Richard's coin phrase with me and we'll let you go after that. So 1, 2, 3.
Wop, bop, loop, bop,
wop, bam, boom. Thanks a lot, Steve. I appreciate your time today. And send me those links and I'll put those in the description. But thank you so much. And
thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Continued success on this. And yeah, let me know when this is all posted and stuff, and I'll share it to my network as well. And really appreciate it. I'll send you that thing on the Injured Patients Compensation Fund too on the Facebook Messenger. Perfect.
All right. Well, you have yourself a great day, and I'll be looking for you on the TV.
Yeah, let's stay in touch and stay safe and healthy there.
Sounds great, Steve. You have a great day.
Appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
You bet. Bye now. I'd like to thank Steve Burrows for coming on Digital Voices today. His story inspired me. His story inspires people around the world now. It's changing the way that things are taught. It's inspiring nurses and doctors to make a stand, to really enforce a movement that is a fundamental flaw in our system. To have medical errors be the third leading cause of death in the United States is unacceptable. Steve had to step away from the limelight and had to focus on being a champion, but in doing so, he's ended up leading a cause. His mother, she teaches us still. I also stand with Judy.